We will begin by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the land where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the third annual McMaster Global Engagement Town Hall Update. As part of McMaster Global and International Education Week activities, Vice Provost of International Affairs, Peter Basher, will provide you with an overview and update on several key global engagement initiatives happening across McMaster, activities that support the McMaster Global Engagement Strategy. After the update, we will have a Q&A discussion with Andrea Bowman, Associate Vice President of Global Health, Faculty of Health Sciences, Sean Van Kounet, Associate Vice President, Students and Learning and Dean of Students, Lydia Kakariri, and Associate Professor, Department of Health, Aging and Society, Faculty of Social Sciences. Peter Masher will moderate. To begin, I'm honored to welcome McMaster Provost and Vice President Academic Susan Tai to share opening remarks and to start today's Global Engagement Town Hall Update.
Great, and thank you very much, Nicole, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It is certainly my pleasure to be here this afternoon to open up and kick off the Town Hall Update with respect to McMaster Global. And it's really important as an institution that we think of ourselves and participate in global activities. This not only creates an environment that fosters learning and education, but it also helps us do research better. It provides a better student experience, and it really adds a lot of value to our education programs. What I'd like to do is just briefly, if we go to the next slide, please, that what we want to do is think about where McMaster places globally. And so certainly one of the parameters that we look at, but I want to be clear, it's not the only parameter that's important, are how we place in terms of our global ranking overview. And certainly we're very, very proud of the recent Times Higher Education rankings that actually placed us 17th in the world for impact rankings. And at the end of the day, as a higher education institution, it is absolutely critical that we have impact. And it's also something that we should be very proud of, is that we were #1 in Canada for the categories of good health and well-being and decent work and economic growth. So that is simply phenomenal. We ranked number 69 in the world on the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. And of course, we were #4 in Canada, and really one of only 4 Canadian institutions that was part of the top 70. You know, and having been at McMaster now for a few months and seeing the types of investments that we've been making into marketing, but also exposing people really to the broader McMaster community has been really critical. Because as more people learn about McMaster, I think that what we're seeing is an actual recognition of the work we're doing, not only in terms of education, but also in terms of research, have a huge impact. As well, of course, there's some other points here on the slide indicating other rankings. And again, it's important that we look at where we are relative to our other institutions, and certainly how we place in Canada. If we go to the next slide, one of the other really important, you know, if we take a moment to think about 17th in terms of the world for global impact, again, this is really important, and I would highly encourage you to take a look at the link here that we've provided in terms of the daily news that actually talks a little bit more in detail about what the significance of these parameters are. Certainly one of the keystone elements to what we're doing in terms of our McMaster fabric is looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're committed to these. it's important that all of our learners and all of our members of the community understand how important the activities that we do to advance these various sustainable development goals. We're currently underway for our 2021 submission, and I know Dr. Masher and team are working very hard to ensure that our submission is prepared appropriately, and that really does reflect what we've been doing. And it's also really important that we think about how we can continue to expand and grow and keep the momentum going with respect to the initiative related to the UN's SDGs in all of our programs. So that means all of our programs across the 6 faculties. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. And I know that the remainder of the slides will be very interesting to you. And I think more than anything, the Q&A will also provide for some great dialogue. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Masher. And thanks again for including me in this important activity today. I think you're on mute, Peter.
Thank you very much, Susan. Much appreciated. And I think what you will see in the next few slides is in part an expansion on the topic of how we see our position in the global society, which I think is a very important aspect, but also to show you the path forward and highlight some of the initiatives that we are planning to conduct over the next year or so. If we stay for a moment with the Sustainable Development Goals, then I think one of the key messages here is that we are not considering these Sustainable Development Goals as the ultimate goal, but more so as a framework within which we want to see many of our activities. And here on this slide, you see a list of current and future activities that all can be seen within the framework of creating a sustainable society and living within a sustainable society. One note that I would like to just make before we continue is on many of the slides, you will see that there's a lot of information. And you will be able to, these slides will be made available on the McMaster Global webpage. And of course, you will have time in the discussion period to pick up all the details. So just to make sure that you don't have to frantically take notes of all these details. One slide that I've shown in previous town hall updates is still, I think, an interesting one, and it puts our international flavor to the fore, and it tells us something about the numbers and how they develop. So again, and I've said this before, I consider McMaster to be a very international place, and that may not be something that is immediately obvious as we live our daily lives when we still were able to come to campus, but we are if you look at the numbers. So for instance, full-time faculty currently come from 55 different countries. International undergraduate students represent over 13% of the student population. And that was less than half only a few years ago. International graduate students represent almost 30% of the graduate student body. McMaster's international students, if you look at 13 and the 28, come actually from well over 100 different countries in the world. So that is the body of students and faculty and staff that are on campus. But then, of course, we have a massive number of alumni, many of whom have now have returned back to what used to be their home country. Many of them have stayed in Canada. But among these alumni, 140 countries are represented, which means basically McMaster has a footprint virtually everywhere in the world. And this is just a quick slide to give you an idea of what the country of origin distribution is of our student body. You will notice that at the undergraduate level, China has still the vast majority with almost 68%. But it is interesting to note that this 68% is significantly less than the fraction used to be. We used to have close to 80% of our international undergraduate students. So there's in particular in Sean's office, there is in the registrar's office, there are significant efforts underway to diversify the origin of students, and these efforts certainly are taking hold. At the graduate level, the distribution is a bit more broad, with the majority of international students coming from China, India, and Iran. Another very interesting observation over the past few years is that the engagement of students in international opportunities has grown significantly. And we are looking here at two different components. One is, if you want, a traditional exchange program, and the participation of McMaster students in exchange programs has tripled since 2010. And we were on track to support nearly 600 exchange students in 2020. Unfortunately, of course, these programs had to be suspended, and some of these programs are now being converted into virtual exchange opportunities, and I will speak more about these virtual opportunities in a few slides. But there are also global experience programs, which are less so, if you wish, traditional in the sense that students take courses, but more so students are engaged in work and volunteer opportunities. And even there, you see that there's a massive growth with over 200 students engaged currently in approximately 40 countries. Overall, our global initiatives are governed and guided by the McMaster model for global engagement. And the three key elements, if you want, from a philosophical framework perspective, are that we wish to view cooperation in the light of peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. We recognize that there's an international demand for the university's expertise in research, education, and learning, and we want to see how we can work with international partners to further that goal. And ultimately, there's, of course, a civic mission of the university. We recognize that we are citizens not only of Hamilton and Ontario and Canada, but we are actually citizens of the world. And so one of the main goals is, of course, to create a large and knowledgeable cohort of students and faculty who can proudly call themselves global citizens. There were 5 strategic priorities identified in the strategy document, and you can see here just by glancing at this slide that significant actions are underway or will be undertaken vis-a-vis any of these five strategic priorities. And I will highlight a few of those as we go through the next few slides. So the first one is, of course, research. We pride ourselves at being a research-intensive university, and we've been rated as Canada's #1 research-intensive university for a number of years. But COVID has changed many things, and at the same time, it has brought out, to some extent, the best in McMaster research. As you can see here, we can look at McMaster's response to COVID-19 from a research perspective in different ways. We can look at it from an individual researcher perspective, and we can certainly say proudly that many McMaster researchers mobilized to deliver on COVID-19 related research projects since the late spring of this year. These initiatives were multidisciplinary, interfaculty, and often in connection with industrial partners. We provide you here with a link to the Mac Talks series on the topic, where you can find some very compelling and interesting examples of how McMaster research has contributed to fighting the pandemic. On a more global scale, we were able to take advantage of our many international connections and our international networks, and where we are a lead partner in the Global Nexus for Pandemics and Biological Threats, which is, as you can see, an international network of scientists, clinical health and medical specialists, and many participants from other disciplines. And the goal is to prevent future pandemics and mitigate global health threats like antimicrobial resistance. And as you can see here from the quote, we are quoting Karen Mossman, who is our Vice President Research, highlighting the collaborative approach, but also the importance of international engagement and international networks. And so if we look at networks and partnerships, then we can ask ourselves, of course, what are the key elements that make it worthwhile to be partner in international networks. And here are 5 key elements that we usually consider when opportunities arise to join networks or to collaborate within partnerships. We want to make sure that we focus on the people involved, whether these be students or researchers or staff or faculty members. We need to recognize that the central focus is the research talent, because the research outcomes are, of course, to a very large extent determined by the quality of the researchers and the infrastructure, but certainly the quality of the researcher. And with that, what we are developing is new knowledge and new information. And that has become, in many ways, both positively and negatively, knowledge and information has become a new global currency. And of course, at times one can be concerned about what the quality is of the information that is being used as a global currency, but by and large, our role in the university is, of course, to provide the most sound and most and best established information available. Coming back to the topic of global citizenship and the civic mission of the university, oftentimes we look at partnerships not just from a peer-to-peer relationship, but also from the opportunity to support emerging research institutions. And the term that is often being used is capacity building, and McMaster has been involved in capacity building initiatives for many years. And then finally, of course, we need to consider involvement of the private sector, especially when it comes to developing to knowledge transfer and to developing modalities of bringing innovation to the market. So here's an example of a multifaceted partnership and where membership in different consortia and different networks can be used to be combined to address, in this case, the issue of future pandemics and antimicrobial resistance. Networking opportunities, of course, are critically important also for our students. And just one very recent example, through our membership in the Universitas 21 network, our students were able to participate in an online leadership development course that that was aiming to enhance the students' cultural competency and global awareness. And I'm very happy to report that even though each one of the U21 member universities was allocated 75 spaces, we easily exceeded this and ultimately managed to secure spaces for 85 McMaster participants. So the desire to interact in this way clearly is there. So the next few slides then talk a bit to the road ahead for 2021 and beyond. There are many uncertainties, as you are undoubtedly aware, as to exactly how we can implement many of these initiatives, but flexibility is the name of the game, and we need to have our guiding principles in place in order to adjust as necessary as we move through the coming year. So one initiative that is being led by the Student Success Center is to develop a centralized global mobility software modality that not only will provide an enhanced user experience, but also will provide a centralized database for travel risk and partnership management. And you might well appreciate the concept of travel risk when at the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic, it was imperative for us to be able to connect with our students that at the time were abroad. And I can assure you that that was not a simple task. I've talked already about virtual exchange concepts in times when travel is not possible. And one of these initiatives is through a modality that is called Collaborative Online International Learning, or COIL. We've engaged with some of the leaders in this field to explore what McMaster's opportunities might be within COIL. And I'm very happy to say that we have Dr. Lydia Capiriri, of course, on the panel, who is spearheading one of the first COIL initiatives at McMaster in collaboration with the University of Göttingen in Germany. And I would say that these virtual exchange and virtual learning opportunities are aiming for the establishment of a global classroom, and these kinds of concepts will likely endure even if we could just turn the switch and bring travel back. I think there are many aspects of virtual global classrooms that are beneficial even if travel is possible. One of which is, of course, to provide access to non-traditional groups that would not normally consider participating in exchange activities. And I'd be happy to talk more about that in the Q&A session. This is a very rich topic to talk about. We were successful just very recently in receiving funding from the federal government for a pilot project having to do with virtual outbound mobility, student mobility. This pilot project will create an infrastructure, a building block for McMaster's future student mobility initiatives, and will teach the students the necessary skills to become and thrive as global citizens, so that they are more successful more rapidly when they engage in international activities. And then, of course, one of the key aspects of how we want to conduct our global engagement is to never forget about our local environment. So in this context, we are planning, together with the Canadian Bureau for International Education, we are planning to host a regional conference that will bring together that will bring together member institutions from across Ontario, where we can compare notes and where we can plan ahead for future initiatives. I'm delighted to tell you that the International Initiatives Microfund has been relaunched, or will be relaunched, has received new funding thanks to our provost, and so we can expect to see the launch of these initiatives with a call for proposals over the next little while. The Student Success Center also has been very much looking at virtual environments, and the quote that John Francunet provided is actually critically important, saying that COVID-19 is an important reminder that global learning is not tied to physical mobility. This is a topic that we used to discuss in a more abstract way. What does global engagement mean if you don't actually go abroad? And of course, these discussions have now been accelerated with the advent of COVID-19, and we are looking at many new strategies and new approaches to the internationalization at home topic. We just completed 2 weeks of programming for the McMaster Global Virtual Showcase, featuring also the events related to the International Education Week. This is an event series that also was transferred from in-person to virtual, and I am very happy to say that it went extremely well, with a lot of participation on various platforms, both Zoom and Brazen and Hopin, which shows that people who are globally engaged are actually quite flexible with their use of technology as well. So just a few highlights. The McMaster Global Event Series, there were different aspects and different types of interactions. We had a number of panel discussions that were very well attended, and they covered topics ranging from the role of higher education in addressing the UN SDGs to a discussion of a shared vision for higher education in the Caribbean, to race and education and Black life in Canada as part of the Wilson Institute speaker series, and to a compelling discussion and interview regarding combating modern slavery and why labor governance is failing and what we can do about it. We held 2 conferences within the McMaster Global Event Series. One was organized by McMaster Global Health, and the topic was working locally, thinking globally, a theme that I've addressed already earlier. And the other one was a very interesting conference, Thinking Water, in conjunction with the Water Without Borders graduate program, a joint event organized by McMaster University and the United Nations University Inouye. There was also a social media event series led and organized by the Student Success Center that challenged students and staff and faculty to think about we can live more sustainably in our individual lives. And by all accounts, this event was very active and very well attended. And then finally, quite a remarkable event was a workshop series called Write and Tell Your Story, where students were invited to reflect on global perspectives and how global perspectives contributed to their intercultural skills. This is an event setup that is similar to, some of you might be familiar with the 3-minute thesis project, where students provide snapshots in their personal language in their personal view of what contributed in this particular case to enhancing their intercultural skills. And as you can see in all of these slides, there are links provided, and you can review all these events. They have all been recorded, and you are welcome to review this event series. Then just the last slide is a heads up. On December 2nd, we are very happy to host a dialogue on investing in health for an equitable future that forms part of the of an event series aimed to celebrate the United Nations 75th anniversary under the title Shaping Our Future Together. And this dialogue will feature Andrea Baumann, who is also on our panel today, Bonnie Bao, who is one of Canada's leading and arguably the world's leading experts in human rights, and Peter Singer, special advisor to the Director General of the World Health Organization, and some of you may have seen and heard of Peter Singer, especially during the early days of the pandemic, when of course the World Health Organization was right in the center of many discussions. So all told, what we do can be really summarized very succinctly into a goal that we try to accomplish, and that is to support the development of a global mindset. I think this is critically important in our society today, and we need to make sure that our students, our faculty, our staff think of the global environment in many different ways when they develop new initiatives, or when they think about teaching, or when they think about learning. So with that, I'll finish my presentation here, and I'll pass the word back to Nicole.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that, and thanks to Susan as well for her opening comments. We'll now move into the Q&A portion of today's update. So this is an opportunity for you, our audience, to ask Peter and our panelists questions about what you've heard today, and anything you may be curious about in relationship to global engagement at McMaster. So welcoming our Q&A panel, we have Andrew Bowman, Associate Vice President of Global Health, Faculty of Health Sciences, Sean Van Kaunen, Associate Vice President, Students and Learning and Dean of Students, and Lydia Capareri, Associate Professor, Department of Health, Aging and Society, Faculty of Social Sciences. Peter Masher will participate and moderate. So welcome.
Thank you, everyone on the panel, for participating in this discussion. And I think one of the questions that I did not have time to really address in my presentation, because it is a very complex issue that, in my opinion, we've handled very well out of Sean's office, is what happens to our international students, the ones that can't come, but probably even more importantly, the ones that do want to come or do come onto campus. How can we support them, and what kind of initiatives did McMaster have to support these students? Maybe John, could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, and Peter, are you referring more to this year, or looking out into the future?
Well, I think it would be of interest to give the audience an idea as to what we did this year, sort of on short notice and under pressure, but then also, of course, what we are thinking about going into the future.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Peter. We were as responsive and as supportive as we possibly could be as COVID hit, and we closed things down in March. So that involved both our students who needed to travel home to another country, and those students who were abroad for different reasons, and trying to get them back into Canada. So that involved providing financial support for their travel arrangements, and also we have tireless staff in different offices, including OIA and Student Success Center, Grad Studies, who were supporting students and trying to help them navigate the various the difficulties in getting through some of the travel restrictions. So that was in the immediate term. As we've moved through time here, and as the government, it's been a little difficult to get a handle on how they were responding to students who wanted to come to Canada. So that's been the more recent challenge, has been trying to interpret changing government requirements. What we have done more recently is we are providing quarantine space in our residences free of charge to students who are traveling here to Canada. So, and having them quarantine in residence enables us to provide the safest environment possible, enables us to monitor things so that they are safe and abiding by the requirements of government to quarantine. And so we're the only university I'm aware of that is paying for students to quarantine on campus. So I think we've gone about as far as we possibly can to support students in enabling them to be here to study. Now, certainly we have a number of students who are still in their home countries and studying abroad and studying remotely. We're not too much different than anyone else in that there are challenges there. There are technological challenges. There are challenges related to being in different time zones. And I know that the task force that was chaired by Dean Puri and Dean Hurley was looking at how we can better support students who are studying remotely, in particular those who are residing internationally. So moving forward, we will continue to adapt. It's a little uncertain, of course, what the fall of 2021 might bring. Hopefully all the learnings we've had to date will prepare us to support students coming up next year.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. Maybe if I could just quickly ask Andrea, what has been your experience in the global health environment? I mean, that's a somewhat separate group of students that are highly focused on their studies, and you've had many international partnerships, and so I wonder what your experience has been regarding the ability of students to actually arrive at campuses and engage in their studies.
It's working closely with the university in terms of, and the universities across Canada have been taking a very different approach in terms of bringing students on campus, depending on the province and how COVID is or is not progressing. Many Ontario universities have brought all of their international students on campus. There was a small glitch in Canada, especially with doctoral students, for example, in terms of PA shift, that they weren't on campus, they couldn't get their allocations, and these types of things had to be worked out. I think Canada could have been a little more organized in that, but of course, epidemics, this is a very unusual circumstance, and I think it's slowly being worked out. There's a lot of hesitancy, and the way universities are organized in terms of their residences and where students live and coming into Canada. And as we all know, we follow very much the Canadian directives in terms of what we can do and what we can't do. I just want to make another point, though, about students going abroad from McMaster. We've been very cognizant of the fact that I think you mentioned in your talk, Peter, actually many go abroad. I mean, it's usually in the hundreds when you go all across the whole university. So how can we replicate that? What can we do in the interim? How can we help students receive an international experience? And I think, again, working with you and some of the people in Sean's office, we're able to get this, or working on a list of companies, organizations, like, for example, in health, WHO, PAHO, where students can still have the experience but work virtually. I mean, if COVID by the summer hopefully has, we have the vaccine, etc., it'll be different. But until then, I'm happy to say we're working extremely diligently to talk to international companies, international NGOs, these types of organizations where students would go and would want to go and would probably be going abroad to do it. So we can offer them this virtual experience. And we have all been working together on what I call a macro list that we were hoping to put onto the website, a university website where all students can look at it. It's taking us some time, but I'm pleased to say that we received very positive, I think, response from, because now everyone realizes COVID and that they're actually very anxious to help the students and actually really anxious to have students. So that's the exciting part. So we're hoping this initiative will move faster so that by January, February, we'll have a wholesome list that students can refer to in the graduate school, as well as we're trying to limit it also if it could be undergraduate as well.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Just following up on this, and I'm picking up a question that was posted to the Q&A by Krista Morrison. She would like to know a bit more about our approach towards virtual classrooms and virtual education. And I would like to bring Lydia into this discussion because she's been really one of the pioneers here at McMaster in developing these new course environments. So the questions that Krista is raising, one of them is regarding teaching and how much of professional development of instructors is required to really make sure that these courses work well. And then, of course, capacity building. And finally, what do you see, Lydia, as the opportunity to develop virtual courses that are topical in the sense that you teach new knowledge in essence, rather than only some sort of discussion groups? So if I could start with you, Lydia, maybe, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. That's a loaded question, but I'll say that I'll give you a background of what I was teaching and what made this very easy for me to transition into. I've been interested in students' global experience, and I've also been aware of the inequities that are introduced by some students being able to pay to travel abroad and others not being able to pay to travel abroad. So actually, I got an LTL project, which pilot tested 2 ways of global exchange last year before COVID, whereby I was saying, can we get the students who cannot travel to experience what international students experience within the classroom? So instead of students traveling abroad, I contacted international organizations to virtually speak to my students. And that went very well. So, and in another course, I was sending students to communities. So I was contrasting 2 approaches. And that is the course I was teaching this semester. And I discovered that I could not send my students to the communities. And I was grappling with how do I make sure that the students get the experience of my previous students when they are not able to travel. And that's when I heard about COIL. I'd never heard about COIL, but I was approached and I was told about COIL and if I would be interested in participating. And we were trained once. We had only 1 session about COIL, but good enough, I connected with an instructor at the University of Göttingen. And we worked together to develop a course which enabled our students to virtually participate in learning, and that course is just coming to an end now. So as far as professional development for instructors goes, I would say that we received 1 training, and I've just been checking in with my colleague. Good enough, my colleague in Göttingen had already had experience with virtual exchanges within Europe. So she easily brought me up to stage with regards to what is required, and took the lead on that, and I learned a lot from her. So that's how my capacity has been built. The good thing was that what she was teaching was very close to what I was teaching topically. So it was very natural for us to work together on a topic, as opposed to just students getting together discussing. Because I was teaching a course on culture and health, and my colleague was teaching a course on intercultural communication. So we made the students work on a health issue, and the reflection was on how they interacted and how they communicated around that cultural issue. So it was easy for us to collaborate on a topical issue, and the interaction went so well for the students that we are planning to do that again on sustainable development goals for the global health course that I teach. So that is what I can say. Professional development for instructors, there is a training that we attended by, I think it was organized by the university, but it was only one-off, and they checked in with us. It was hands-on. Yeah, that's all I can say about that. If you have any additional question, please ask.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lydia. Andrea, if I could just quickly ask you, you ran a very successful workshop within global health, where the students work together on projects. Do you think that's another model that one could use for such virtual exchange programs?
Yeah, we run a foundation 1 and 2. Dr. Gombe's on the line. He is the overall coordinator of those courses, and we have 7 universities involved with 7 professors, more than 7 actually, 35 professors from the 7 universities, and we do it by small group. So that's been very successful, and it's a very, I would suggest it's been very well received, and it's a good educational model for international exchange and for a student, and these students are all from the different 7 universities as well. So it is one model that works really well, and it's one maybe we should discuss further. It's not that difficult to do. It does take some time to build up, but it's quite successful.
Thank you. Another question just came into the Q&A box that is clearly related to this discussion by Andrea. It says here, thank you for the thoughtful updates. What do panelists see as McMaster's commitment to global sustainability concerning the future of outbound and inbound student travel? So if I start this just very briefly, I think the global footprint of international travel is going to be one of the questions that will stay with us even after COVID. And I think many of the developments of virtual learning environments and virtual exchange environments will have to consider exactly that aspect as a justification. But if we relate it back to the sustainability concerns, there are many other aspects rather than just flying around the world. So I wonder if any one of the Lydia is smiling. So I think, you know, on the one hand, we want to make sure that our footprint is as small as possible. But on the other hand, there are certain aspects of international travel that cannot be replaced, right? Being at a different place is simply different from just engaging with international students virtually, right? And so I guess there will have to be a balance between two aspects. Would you agree? Maybe Sean or Lydia? I mean, Sean has been thinking about internationalization at home for quite a while, right? And this has just been accelerated now by COVID, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to start, Lydia? Go ahead.
I can say something because it bugs me not so much. Okay, I worry about the environment, but I also worry more about the inequities that only students who can afford travel abroad. So I think as a university, it's important that we think creatively about this experience, because if we think it's important and we need our students to become global citizens, then those opportunities should be available to all students who might want to experience that. And I'm just, what I'm thinking about right now is that I don't think that there should be just do this or don't do this. You know, you cannot go abroad, because as someone who was internationally educated, I always value who I am, and I'm passionate about the things I am passionate about because of the different countries where I was privileged to study. And I would want all students who can and are able to have that experience, but let that not trump the experience or those students who may not be able to afford to travel abroad or to be supported to travel abroad. It might not be financial, it might be other reasons that prevent other people from traveling abroad. So I feel like we should think creatively about, as an international office, as people who are interested in internationalization, about strategies through which we can support both experiences. And I think developing courses whereby students can learn about things and experience things, that may be one way to go. The virtual exchange programs can also be one strategy, but I think we need to creatively think around this, whereby we say there are students who should travel and those can go, but those who can't travel, we need to think about how to meet that need and that gap in their education.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for this very important point. Sean, you wanted to...
Yeah, and maybe I'll just, I agree fully with what Lydia is saying. If the outcome we're trying to achieve is to educate global citizens, there are a range of ways in which we can do that. We need to look at the barriers, to the different barriers that students may encounter in achieving those, and try to reduce those. So whether it's financial, and whether there are technical means that we can, or remote means that we can further this objective, which we are doing now, as has been talked about. I think in many venues across the university, where what will happen, I think, with COVID is we are doing a lot of things that might have taken 5 years and are now taking 5 months. We have to learn what are the things that have worked. You know, we're not, and let's take those and not forget about them and just go back to the old ways. Let's take the strengths of what we've learned over the last 8 months, I guess now 8 or 9 months, and transport them into the future, as well as, you know, do some of the things that we did do in the past and that we miss doing and that are valuable in doing from the pre-COVID days, if any of us can actually remember back that far. So I think it's that outcome that we have to keep in mind, which is how do we educate global citizens? How do we expose them to the world and give them opportunities to learn about the world and learn about themselves in the process?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the point that Lydia made about providing access for students who would not otherwise be able to participate is one of the main reasons for the federal government to establish this new support program, where we were successful in the first pilot phase to get seed funding, essentially for exploring what could be done. And one of the explicit conditions of this federal program is to emphasize participation from groups of students who otherwise would not normally participate in such programs. So I think this goal is well recognized, and we will certainly do our best to work towards that. Okay, let me just see here, a few more questions. Right, so there was a question about what changes McMaster has made to its international programming in light of the coronavirus and travel restrictions. And I think that question feeds back into the discussion that we just had. I think everybody involved showed tremendous flexibility in adjusting and transferring of contents into online and virtual environments. And as Sean said, this is undoubtedly going to continue, and we need to just pick the really successful elements, even for times after COVID. Let me just see here. So there was a point made about some of the technology infrastructure that we will definitely use to develop these new courses, as Sean quite correctly said, right? We are doing this on a very compressed timescale. Normally, these kinds of development, especially in a university environment, take a long time. And now we are forced into developing things much more quickly, which means that undoubtedly there will be some things that don't work quite as well as they would have. And so, a careful analysis will undoubtedly be useful for the future. So I wonder, we are almost at the end of the hour. Maybe if I could invite each one of the panelists to just offer some brief concluding remarks before we close. I'll start maybe with Andrea.
Just a very quick note. On an optimistic note, there has been access to many more virtual experts than ever before, because many of them are working from home, and so we can access them for our students. So that's been really exciting. The other thing is, as I said, companies and NGOs are much more oriented now to virtual and are really looking forward to working with education to place students. So this is a very positive outcome, I think, of our rather challenging environment right now.
Okay, maybe Lydia.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think these are challenging times, but they've also forced us to think. And as a global researcher, I'm very glad that now you don't have to explain what you do to people, because globalization has become real through this COVID outbreak. And I hope that it also provides us with usually solutions are born out of challenges. So I'm very glad that there are several solutions and innovations that are happening now that are going to champion the internationalization of McMaster that way beyond the COVID outbreak. So I'm very excited.
Thank you very much. That's very, very good to hear. We need champions in university. For any kind of initiative, you need champions. And so this is great to hear. I'll give the final word of the panel to Sean. His office has been really instrumental in making it possible for our international students to, at times, literally survive the COVID environment. The infrastructure and the support that was provided was essential. So I'll leave the final comments to Sean.
Sure, thanks, Peter. I think one of the things that COVID has done is it just highlighted how interconnected we all are here. What happens in another country, isn't isolated, and we're all affected by what happens in the global sphere, and our students are affected. And so one of the things that I'm focused on and that we're focused on as a university is creating an inclusive environment for students, one that students from around the world will feel that McMaster is a welcoming place. I think that becomes even more important, and I think we've illustrated more recently, as you've indicated, how we've supported our international students through this is just one indicator of how we are here for them. And those things matter. Those are the right things to do, and those are things that students will note, and that our reputation as a university that truly values them and values the experience that we're trying to deliver for them. That's a high priority for us. And so I think we're on the right trajectory. We're weathering this crisis well, I think, and there could still be a ways to go, but I think we're going to come out the other side in a very good position.
Thank you very much, Sean, and all of the panelists. And I'll pass the baton back to Nicole, our host and MC.
Thank you, Peter. Echoing your thanks, I just really want to thank all our esteemed panelists for being with us here today, and to our audience for all of your thoughtful questions. There's definitely a lot to discuss on this topic, and we really do look forward to more discussions like this, ongoing discussions like this in the future with you. If you have any questions at all or ideas, certainly please send your thoughts, ideas to macglobal@mcmaster.ca. So macglobal@mcmaster.ca. We really look forward to hearing from you. I also want to make a special thanks to Rachel Nelson of our McMaster Student Success Center events and marketing team. She's been doing all the behind the scenes coordination for this event, as well as several other events as part of McMaster Global. And so thank you for all that you've done to make our events run smoothly.